something like that, right now.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, I don't think this microphone works. Good morning! Yes. All right, so welcome everyone on DEF CONF. I'm really glad to see so many people here, and surprise, surprise, we have double the number of people outside waiting. So, welcome to yet another great conference. So first thing first, who's here for the first time? Raise your hands. That's a lot of people. All right, let's try it the other way around. Who's been here more than once? More than twice? More than 3 times? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is already a 10th annual conference. We have an anniversary here, and it's amazing. And that actually means that we have some surprise for you. So we'll talk about this when we get here. But first thing, so for those who are here for the first time, what is DEF CONF? So DEF CONF is still a kind of a special conference. From my perspective, it's special because A, we don't charge you for coming here. B, it's been organized by one single person, and that's Chris here. But, surprisingly, he's not the most important person here. But it's all the volunteers. So we have, how many volunteers? Around 100, basically, all together involved in organizing this conference, at least 100 people. And yeah, thank you. So here's the thing. If you've purchased the ticket for this conference, there were 2 options. You either pay or not pay for the ticket. Who paid here for the ticket? So if you didn't pay, there was an SLA that you're becoming a volunteer as well. That's the beauty of this conference. So if you see something going wrong here, if you can help with something, please do it. This is, again, volunteering event, so we're all helping each other, making sure that this thing just works. Same about the speakers. Most of the speakers that you will see here this weekend, these 3 days, are freshmen that are new in presenting their stuff. So please be patient with them. Please give them feedback. Talk to them after the conference. Enjoy the hallway conversations here. That's another thing. Just make sure that you're part of this conference. All right, so maybe I'll go to another one. You've probably seen the schedule. So the schedule is up there. This link also works on a mobile phone, so make sure you get your schedule and pick the great talks. But there are a few golden rules how to enjoy the conference here. Please respect the full sign. So we're at the maximum capacity of this venue, which means that we've registered as many people as every single room can hold here. So that doesn't really mean that you'll be able to get to all the talks here, unfortunately. We're working hard. Ladja over there is working hard to make sure that the streaming works, and this is all recorded. Just don't disturb him, please. So hopefully it will be, everything will be recorded. And again, unfortunately, we can't squeeze you all in the rooms. Keep this place clean. So I'm really glad that we're organizing this conference here at the beautiful venue of Brno University of Technology. It's really nice here, but please make sure we keep it clean and we return it in the shape that we got it. So don't leave any trash behind. Please don't bring food inside. Drinks are sort of okay. No, they're not. Closed bottles are okay, so please be careful about these coffees here. What else? Chris, just jump in. Oh, this is something you wanted to talk about.
So, some of you might have heard the DevCom flu called last year. Some people left the venue sicker than they came. Please take hygiene into consideration. Wash your hands as often as you possibly can over the next few days. Really, there's 1,500 people here moving in and about. There is sickness here. If you're not feeling well, we are YouTubing the main rooms anyways. Please do consider leaving if you're not feeling well and watching from the comfort of your bed. I'll just continue. So Wi-Fi, you might have found already, the connection does work, but it might not work right now with everybody connecting at once with their 3 devices. So please, if you don't need your watch and your phone and your laptop and your whatever else you have in your backpack connecting to the Wi-Fi, turn off auto connect and connect only when you need it. Use your data on your mobile phone whenever possible. Really, the infrastructure here is not intended for this many people on the network at once.
All right, so we have a couple of special things. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this is our anniversary conference, and we have a special event organized for all of you tonight. Should I tell you what it is? Probably not, but you might get it from the picture, actually. After the conference, after the very last talk, make sure you grab your coat, get a free drink that will be ready here, and get out on the courtyard on this small square in the middle, and see what happens. That's all I will tell you. But we have a couple other things, of course. So the special event is organized, so this special event is organized tonight, but tomorrow we have our party. And this is our classic place that we've been using for the last couple of years, with one exception, right? So Fleda, if you don't know how to get there, there will be some maps available and some instruction. You just hop on a tram. It's like, I don't know, 7, 8 stops towards to the city center. Get a ticket. So the ticket is the small badge that I still hopefully have here. You can get it from our beautiful girls at the reception at the entrance. And unfortunately, the number of tickets is limited due to the size of this place, so make sure you get one as soon as possible.
I'll just mention that each morning, today and tomorrow, there are approximately 150 or so tickets we're distributing. And if you don't have a ticket and you want one and they don't have already, I think they're already out for this morning, come tomorrow morning early, pick it up, and you will get it. Otherwise, sorry. Again, 1,500 people or so, 700 tickets, so.
Cool. Sunday. Here's something that I'm going to share with you. So this year it was extremely hard to pick these talks that we have at the conference. We had over 500 submissions, and we had to pick 220, roughly 250 talks. So we've squeezed in half of the talks. But what I extremely struggled with was that all the talks were really great. All the submissions were really great, and it was really hard to pick the right ones. So till Sunday evening, we're running full speed. Every single talk is super interesting. Make sure you stay around. If you do, and you will survive these 3 days, there's something special ready for you at the very last session. Those who've been here already last year or the year before know what's going to happen. We will have some competition here. You will be able to win some prizes. It's going to be a lot of fun. So stay for all 3 days. Don't party too much on Saturday. Make sure you come again on Sunday and enjoy the conference.
Sure. Everybody probably already knows about the main social networks that we're using, but just if you want to take a picture or go to the devconf.cz and you can find links to all these as well. If you want to tweet, our little hashtag is #DefineFuture. So send me an email, send us an email at info@devconf.cz if you have any questions or issues during the event. We are checking those channels, but there's a lot of things going on, so if we miss you, the email is the best way to guarantee that you reach us. And on that note as well, I know some people aren't terribly excited about photography, but it is permitted here and we encourage it. However, be respectful of your peers. If in fact someone does not feel comfortable, feel free to tell the person who's about to take your picture that you don't want to be included in, or move out of the way ideally, which is what I'm about to ask you guys to do now. I'm going to do a selfie, which means, please, if you don't want to be in this picture, just go anonymous. Oh, hold this. You can keep talking.
All right, everyone smile. All right, so I have here one more announcement, and this is something I'm really proud of. Already last year, DEF CON became global and is becoming even more global. So we will have 2 other locations organizing DEF CON this year. One will be in India and in Pune. Another DEF CON will be organized in Boston in September, end of September pretty much, right? August, thank you. I wasn't sure about September. I always miss it. I can't read that. The important thing is that we're opening CFP for DEF CON Boston pretty much right now. So it's already open. 30 minutes ago it was open. If you go to defconf.us, you can already sign up for talks. We have some posters here inviting you for the conference. The thing is that we can't squeeze you all in this venue and we want to stay here, but we see a lot of people traveling from different locations. You can now enjoy DEF CON 3 times a year. That's amazing, right? On different places. And in some cases, even with the better weather, right? So that's perfect. All right, so DEF CON becoming global, and I think that's it, right? So enjoy the conference. It's going to be crazy. Again, be patient with our speakers. Make sure you give them feedback. Make sure you give us feedback, to me and Chris, about the conference as well. One more selfie, seriously. And with that, I'm going to invite our first keynote speaker. It's Chris Wright, the Chief Technology Officer at Red Hat, but also a kernel hacker, KVM hacker, security developer, cloud specialist. Chris, you need to come up because I will continue.
Thank you. Where should I plug my
Want a
laptop?
selfie?
Yeah. A selfie? Hell yeah. Can you call it a selfie if you take it of me?
Well, I'm going to give it to you. Just push the button.
All right. Thank you.
Good luck.
It's coming up. So it's all yours.
I've got it. Oh, you got one?
This one works.
Cool.
Where are your slides? Come on now.
Radek said this was really exciting. This is the exciting part. Just you can log it in. It's not wanting to display without the login.
So slow.
The Wi-Fi is overloaded. Yeah. That did not go. Okay, we have it.
Now you have it over there. Just move it to the side, and you will see it there. This is Libra, so you can switch the Google Slides. Just move the whole browser over there and start it. I don't think so, really. All right, so this happens when you rely on the internet connection here and on Google Slides. Coming up. Perfect. Chris?
All right. Sorry about that. Thank you for the kind introduction. And this is the 10th DevConf, which means it's the 10th one that I've missed, not intentionally. I've actually tried to come multiple times. I was even here in Brno 7 years ago, the week leading up to DevConf, and due to mere stupidity, I left on Friday morning, so I missed the DevConf. So I'm really stoked to be here. I have a question for the folks here. How many people in this part of the audience that I can see are students? We got some students? Okay. And how many people are passionate about open source? Yeah, that's cheating. How many people are passionate about open source and employed professionally as open source developers or in the community some way? Yeah, awesome. So I guess the point is you can be passionate about open source and that can lead you into a job and career. And a lot of what I think is interesting about an event like this is we're here in a university setting. We're talking about open source. It's got a commercial element, and I'll warn you ahead of time, these slides are a little more commercial than I'm sure most of the rest of the talks today will be, or the rest of the session will be. So a little bit about me. I've been an open source user since the mid-90s. It all started for me with somewhere above 50 Slackware floppies, slowly downloaded across a dial-up connection, really trying to create a Unix-like environment for myself at home. I had worked with Unix in school. I had, Unix workstations at work, and I was desperate to have that same environment at home. And a friend of mine came to me one day and said, "Oh, you got to download this thing called Slackware." And the first thing was 50 floppies, and the second thing was I actually had to learn a lot just to get it installed. And configuring X was somewhat mysterious. In fact, if you're deeply involved, it still is. It's just gotten a lot easier, and a lot of things are hidden. And that I enjoyed. I really was fascinated by the technology piece. And today, over 20 years later, it's still a part of what I do. And I'm excited to share with you a little bit about how that's impacted me personally, and then what we do at Red Hat in this space of evolving technology in the open source context. I started as a developer a few years later, so initially I was really focused on just using, consuming, mostly passively. And the difference between consuming passively and totally engaging in a community was night and day. And I got inspired immediately, actually by a person who I'm still in connection with, who invited me to help with this project he was starting to do distributed computing and high availability and things that I'm still interested in today. Since then, I found the kernel community. I did a lot of work in security and joined Red Hat in 2005. And today I'm the CTO of Red Hat, and I'm focused on helping Red Hat build our next generation technology strategy. Definitely, I am a person who's passionate about open source, and I spend a lot of time talking about that. So the first bit I wanted to share with you was some thoughts I have about open source specifically. And the thing that got me so excited about open source initially was collaborating with other people and generating ideas in ways that I wasn't capable of doing on my own, especially in a space that I was learning about, and I was learning from real experts, people who had done this themselves for a decade in advance of me even hearing about the topic. And so that, to me, was just sort of magical. I was so excited that I could learn from the experts, and I haven't lost that. I was just travel a lot. I think I was in Vietnam, and I was working with some colleagues, some Red Hatters, and that same thrill of sitting down with somebody, this was in person rather than virtual, sitting down with somebody and brainstorming and creating solutions to problems, it just struck me. This was in September. It just struck me that it's been over 20 years, and I still get that same excitement out of collaborating with others. I wanted to point some of these things out because I think they're important parts of what open source is. They're really important to me, and hopefully they resonate with you and generate some ideas of how you operate within communities and what's important to you and how you want to impact communities. Another important piece that took me a little bit longer to realize was this notion of trust, and I don't hear it really spoken about a lot, or at least enough. And the reason I think trust is so important is there's a very human aspect to trust. Trust is about human relationships. Clearly there's trust as in cryptographically secure exchanged data, and you're trusting the other side because you can verify that it is who it says it is. But with human relationships, it's a little different. And in a community, we're creating these bonds of people. And it's the people that are working together who are trusting each other to make a difference. And that, I think, is part of what I find exhilarating about open source. It's certainly something I learned mostly, or like the most I learned about trust and community was in the kernel community, which has this very kind of hierarchical structure, which is about delegating trust because Linus does not scale. And the amount of trust that you give to somebody to maintain software that in the case of something like the Linux kernel is impacting the lives of millions of people every day, that level of trust is, you can understand how it's really important. And part of the trust is knowing that everybody is going to screw up. And what's important is not that you don't make mistakes, it's how you respond to those mistakes. And the trust comes from the quick response and the quick remediation, the quick action when you make a mistake. So I think it's a really important thing, and I wanted to highlight it. I trust that this thing will advance. It's really trust. I'll go the old-fashioned way. Wow, that's a bummer. Okay. The other piece is, I think I've lost Wi-Fi. The other piece is initiative. Initiative to me is the ability to just get in and make a difference. Anybody can get in and make a difference, and that is something I'll touch on a little later, but that's the other piece that first taste of open source development that I had, the experience of coming from nowhere, getting involved, and being able to immediately make a difference gives you a sense of being empowered. And that empowerment and the impact that you can create is all driven from your own initiative. And I think that's something that should be celebrated, and it's a great part, it's a great aspect of the open source development model. Another piece that I think is really important that I've thought about mostly in the context of the software is diversity. And diversity, to me, initially was all about taking on a diverse set of workloads for a software platform. The more diverse the workloads, the more changes are required to the underlying software to support the different types of workloads. Ultimately, to me, that requires code refactoring, architectural refinements, improvements even, and something that turns the software from something that works today into something that can evolve into the future. And to me, again, coming from kind of a Linux background, the kernel is a great example of that. And the other piece that I've learned over the course of time is an important element to diversity is the people involved in the project. Diversity in terms of age and race and gender and just general background and perspective. It really changes the dynamic of the community in a positive way. I think the more diverse the community, both from a human point of view as well as the software workloads point of view, the more mature and long-lived that project will be. So to me, in open source, we're building a diverse community to write and maintain. Got to maintain the software, or over time it's useless and it'll devolve into irrelevance. Software that's solving real problems that users really care about. And to me, that was also an exciting part, knowing that contributing code to a project that's actually running out there, independent of me, on the internet, in cars, in devices, it's really remarkable. And knowing that it's put into production, and you're not just sort of thinking about technically cool solutions that are academically interesting but not practically interesting, is something that is personally motivating, and I think it's an important part of what makes open source projects successful. So I posit that open source is the upstream or headwaters or source of technological innovation today. At points in the past, large companies could afford to hire armies of smart people and develop cool ideas. Today, you can't compete with the breadth and scale of the masses of humanity across the planet. And there's a lot of kind of exceptions to this rule, but the general notion that major innovation is happening in open source today, I think is easy to at least point out with a number of concrete examples. And for me, certainly the kernel is one example. And what I like about the kernel is you could argue it's largely a clone of existing ideas. I mean, it's POSIX compliant, it's just Unix. But what's inside is continually changing and evolving and has invented new primitives. So there's new system calls, there's new concepts. And today, that stack that starts at the bottom in the kernel is fundamentally different than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And I think a lot of that has to do with the technology innovation that's happening in open source. There's a dilemma that goes along with that. And that dilemma, to me, is partially the notion of evolution versus revolution. And I'm a big fan of the evolving software to make changes. It's really easy to create a new project. And open source is a big reason why it's easy to make a new project. GitHub has millions and millions of Git repositories. And with a little bit of sharing and the internet, you can quickly create a repo for yourself, throw some code up there, and there you have an open source project. So and it could be new and interesting and have never really been done before. I think that the dilemma that's posed here is, especially in places that are new, there's a tendency to say, I'm going to create something new. Nobody's explored this. I'm going to create a new thing. And quickly you see 10 or 20 of them. And you have a lot of duplicate effort. And you could sort of take this to the hyperbolic extreme and say, well, everybody on the planet could create their own open source project. And that would fundamentally kill the value of open source software development because there's no collaboration. So we have to find this balance between innovation and expansion and new ideas and the contraction and focus and evolving software. And there's not one perfect way to do it. It's just an interesting thing to think about. And when you're thinking about creating a new project, I think it's also useful to look at what are existing projects that I could evolve to move in the direction that I think is interesting. So just a dilemma. I have a personal bias, I guess, against hype. And I see a lot, because open source is so mainstream today, the VC world creates a cycle of enthusiasm around buzzwords that aren't always well understood, and it creates this explosion of innovation, which is exciting, but it's not necessarily sustainable, both from a business point of view as well as a community and open source project point of view. So, just an interesting dilemma, just an observation. Make of it what you will. This is just an attempt to talk about the innovation cycle. Starts with new ideas. New ideas, again, could be inside an existing project. Those new ideas are things that the early adopters tinker with and play with and adapt to their own environments. And ultimately, if there's business value, there's some commercial interest, and people start productizing it, something that Red Hat does. And over time, those innovations and products start to represent standard building blocks for businesses that are running their business on this software. Red Hat plays in the space of the working in the innovation in the upstream and helping do the kind of early stage tinkering and building those products and then helping our customers standardize around platforms. But I think one of the interesting things that happens in this whole process is the standardization piece. And standardization historically meant something really specific. It meant people sitting in rooms like this debating over commas versus semicolons on papers that were going to be specifications, that were going to be ways for businesses to interoperate. And I'm kind of suspicious of leading standards, because if you don't have an implementation, you don't actually know how it works. Standards for interoperability in the beginning were about two black boxes talking to each other. In many cases, it's like network protocols. So you need this hard definition of how you're going to communicate. Today, everything is built out of software. Software has APIs. Well-defined APIs allow for innovation on either side. But getting the APIs right is hard. We've shown ourselves as an industry that we suck at that. And we actually suck at it so badly that we had to create things like virtualization and containers to trap together layers of the stack, because if you change anything, something's going to break. And I call it a kind of a fundamental failing of computer science, that we haven't understood how to create interfaces and show types of compatibility, whether it's ABI compatibility, syntactic or semantic compatibility, in ways that allow us to change the software on both sides without breaking things. So that's a challenge to you. Let's work together to try to figure that out. And while virtualization is really exciting technology from a under how it's built point of view, and containers are having a huge impact on the industry, I feel like there's probably something better we could do in terms of that. The problem domain that we've worked against is solving change, breaking things, and we're doing it through, I think, the not necessarily elegant manner. So there's another piece of standards and open source that I think is interesting, which is politics, in my experience, stifle innovation, and this is the standards body process. Open source is mainstream. Open source is increasingly what I call corporatized. You look at open source projects, and there's big dollars behind them. There's foundations supporting them. And in that, we risk recreating these political environments that ultimately slow things down and create unhealthy kind of working environments. And so it's the curse of success here is we've drawn in the attention of the entire industry. And we need to help sustain the core values of what makes open source successful while enabling all of these businesses to really change how they operate, because I do think it's powerful on the business side. So just another kind of observation and food for thought. What I've seen over the last 10 years or so is we've been focusing on this notion of improving speed for developers. And that started, and operational efficiencies. So it started with things like virtualization and server consolidation, and today you see it in containers with containerized applications and the promise of microservices and all these kind of buzzwords. To me, what we're trying to create is an environment of autonomy. The more you can work, and this is sort of at odds with this collaboration concept maybe, but I think you'll see it's not exactly. The more you can work independently from others. So the fewer dependencies you have in your day-to-day job, the more rapidly you can make progress. And we're creating these systems that are trying to enable that. So a bare metal server that has a gold image that's owned by IT ops that you have to request, and it takes 80 days before they can order the server, provision it, and get you a space to run your application, clearly is a long time compared to kind of API-driven push-button infrastructure that, boom, you've got a container and you're running and your application is going straight from source code, commit, trigger, integrate, test, deploy. It's that kind of autonomy improves the agility of the developer and the overall system. And ultimately, I think what we're doing is building a kind of platform that allows the developer to specialize in the area that's important for whatever, they're employed somewhere working on a business problem for the company they're working for, focus on that problem domain specifically, certainly in concert with others, because typically applications are combined of multiple services today, but largely running independently and interacting through APIs. So again, figuring out how to specify APIs, express them, and do that in a way that doesn't break things when you change, but when you're changing, is really fundamentally important. Ultimately, the reason our customers care is it allows them to create value for their businesses. And the way we hear this happening all the time is our customers are saying, what we're trying to achieve is maximizing value, which means developers are focused on writing code that's actually important, central to our business, not code that's sort of ancillary code or framework code or platform code that's not really directly involved with helping us run and evolve our business. So to me, the platform, this unified platform, is a space that creates a contract or a communication medium between the developer side of the house and the operations side of the house. It helps the developers specialize. In an open source world, it helps us eliminate kind of the proprietary vendor lock-in. And because open source is the source of technological innovation, it allows businesses to quickly tap into that innovation without themselves having to become experts in all these spaces or be beholden to vendors to create new magic for them. They can really tap into the creativity of the world abroad. In that avoid vendor lock-in space, there's another thing that I see emerging, and you've probably read about this because there's been a number of articles in trying to think about what is the impact of cloud on open source. Most clouds are built from open source software. Many of those clouds are built from open source software skinned with API services, and the changes that are happening inside are really potentially locked there. They're not very visible. It's essentially a proprietary system. And some are questioning, is that the beginning of the end for open source software? I don't know. I hope not, obviously. I'm pretty invested in this. I was on a panel with somebody from, I think it was Google, Amazon, and Oracle, all running their clouds, and I just asked them, how much do you internally prioritize ensuring that your changes are pushed upstream? And I didn't get great answers to my satisfaction. The answers I got were, well, we create cool open source projects. That doesn't really answer my question. And we participate in communities. Like, all these are good things, but I think there's some questions about what can we do as an open source community to change the notion of expectations and even running things as services. There's some people who are looking at ways to create open source software running as a service as a part of the community effort. So I think we also need to think in terms of how we evolve with the changing business dynamics in the changing world. So again, just sort of an interesting observation and food for thought. This is what we do at Red Hat, which is we work in the upstream communities. We identify useful innovation. We kind of bring that into our world and our platforms and deliver that to our customers to help them meet their business needs. And so this is sort of our aspirations, and then this is how that manifests. Today we talk a lot about something called the Open Hybrid Cloud, which is really taking open source software as open source software, running it across many infrastructures, and allowing users to use it in ways that are more directly engaged with the software products or projects, and not necessarily trapped behind APIs and operated as services in ways that are leveraging open source but not part of the broader open source ecosystem. So if we go back in time just briefly, we don't have to go back very far. Containers were emerging technologies. Talk about big data, talk about automation. And containers at that time were largely developer-focused workflows. Big data was synonymous with Hadoop. And automation was really just saying, take anything you do repeatedly and figure out some way to script that or automate that. We've been involved in all these areas and working to innovate these different spaces. And today, containers have really changed the industry. And containers are no longer a single container on your laptop that's a developer environment. It's part of a whole workflow, and ultimately it's a way to distribute your application across large-scale infrastructure. For us at Red Hat, that's Kubernetes. But it's an interesting thing to look at that cycle where the foundations for containers have been in Linux for a long time. It took something new and exciting like Docker to help the world see the developer potential. And then it took more time for the broad-scale orchestration platforms like Kubernetes to tap into that workflow and make it accessible to the mainstream. And in there, you saw that innovation cycle. So there was a competition between Swarm and Kubernetes and Mesos. And there's value in that competition, but I think ultimately there's value in the consolidation, and we see kind of de facto standardization around Kubernetes in this case. And the benefit, I believe, there is we get the entire industry rallying around a software project. In the big data space, it's evolved, and big data is, the important part of big data is the data and the size and the volume and maybe the lack of structure. The tooling that you do analysis of that data with has changed. And today the hype and excitement is around AI and machine learning. And so we're trying to figure out what that means for us at Red Hat. From an industry point of view, there's proliferation of libraries and frameworks to do different types of machine learning with large quantities of data. And my expectation is in this space we'll see something similar, where initially you get that expansion of innovation and ideas, and over time we'll see some consolidation and the industry finding the best tools and the ways to rally around those tools and carry them for the long term forward. Automation for us has been a space that's gone from just script it to, again, from a Red Hat point of view, looking at Ansible as a tool that can do automation for a broad number of workflows. And one that I've been most excited about is in the networking space, network devices are closed. And so getting something like a chef agent or a puppet agent on that device is challenging, especially when they're written in languages that require a big footprint, and these are devices with not a lot of space. Ansible being agentless has really changed how network operators look at automating their infrastructure. And I think that's just an amazing thing to see open source software and simple ideas make a big impact in industries that weren't even the focus area for a project. There's a lot of questions around what's next. Serverless is definitely one of those it's next pieces. Serverless is an interesting one in the sense that by itself, it's a lightweight way to execute some code. But it's not very interesting by itself. What's really interesting is how it's integrated to an entire system, because what it represents is an event-driven kind of asynchronous programming model, which is actually difficult to do when you're writing code, including the events, the triggers, the async frameworks. But when you have all that taken care of you in a platform, and all you focus on is what is the event trigger and what's the action you take on that trigger, it really changes your requirements for understanding the complexities of that type of a system, and it makes the value of that type of system accessible to the broad set of enterprise developers out there. And so I'm sure serverless will be have a big impact on the industry. We've been interested in it at Red Hat. We've been spending some time looking at the OpenWhisk project and combining that with Kubernetes. I'm sure because it's the early days, we'll continue to see more frameworks popping up, and I know the Kubernetes project itself is interested in kind of more native integration of serverless type technology. So it's a space that will change, but I think what's interesting is how it frees up developers to focus uniquely on the piece of the problem that they care about. So that earlier, autonomy and simplify the developer's life, serverless is an extension of that spectrum. And then there's more future technology, blockchain, edge computing, machine learning, not just as a technology, but as a workflow, model, development life cycles, a number of things that are interesting. And as you get further out, quantum computing is something that's on the horizon because we've run out of capacity with Moore's law. Physics are starting to get in the way. And so, there's a long tail of interesting technology to come. So one of the things that we've learned along the way is most of our customers are trying to address problems at scale. And when you're addressing a problem at scale, scaling a single machine up doesn't work, so you need to scale across machines. And once you're scaling across machines, you have a distributed system. Distributed systems allow you to scale not just for one component, but they allow you to put components together. So any kind of service-oriented architecture or more modern software architecture itself is a distributed system. So what we're seeing is kind of these layers of distributed systems. The platforms themselves are distributed systems, and they're there to build applications which are distributed systems. Distributed systems are hard. There's a lot of academic literature describing the challenges of distributed systems. There's the 7 or 8 fallacies of distributed systems which say things like, don't trust your network, even though something like Corba tried to teach you that the network doesn't really exist. It's just a magic object, and you call methods into it, and hey, what could go wrong? So one of the things that we're looking at from a big picture point of view is how do we help build distributed systems in ways that are sustainable, and part of it is creating platforms for others to use so that you focus the industry expertise in a certain layer and eliminate that need for developers to focus on that problem. And again, just focus on the areas that they care about. In this context, everything requires automation. So you're automating your infrastructure, you're automating your application deployment, you're automating your development pipelines, and the automation tools aren't the critical piece. It's the notion that everything you do is managed through compute cycles. hand touching and human cycles. And the automation is in part coming from the platform. So something like Kubernetes helps you automate how you manage a distributed application. And in part, it could be more traditional automation like configuration management or workflow orchestration. Another interesting thing that pops up is in these complex systems, security takes on a different dimension. So you need to look at security from a systems point of view. You can't think of it from a single application. How do I authenticate the user, and what's the kind of roles that this user can use in the system? But it's how do all the components in the system interact? What happens when I'm moving data around? Where is it encrypted? Where is it in plain text? The problems are really quite different. And I think it's an area that's just fundamentally interesting and not unexplored, but has a lot of room for improvement. It's a life cycle management when you're building an application, ensuring that what you deploy itself is secure, not just in the I've analyzed the code and I know it's secure, but at least, which can be difficult, but at least I've deployed something that I know has no known vulnerabilities in it, which historically was actually hard. And having tools that let you track what you've placed where is a great step in helping you ensure that you're placing secure content and running it in production, at least content that doesn't have known vulnerabilities. So I think this sort of space of security in large distributed systems is an area that we can improve on as an industry. You can't talk about security without noting Meltdown Inspector. And Meltdown Inspector are manifestations of really a remarkable observation that was latent for decades in computer hardware architecture that we've not noticed. I mean, maybe somebody has and has been secretly stealing all of our data out of shared resources for quite a long time, but it's pretty amazing to see something like a core algorithm, the Tomasulo algorithm, being everybody says it's not their bug, so the hardware manufacturers are saying, it's a software problem. The software folks are saying, the hardware isn't helping us out here, but it sort of doesn't matter. The users are the ones that are exposed, and it's across multiple architectures, and it's across multiple software projects. And so I think it's worth us looking at how do we respond to these things. This one was an event that started with research and was well known by a small number, and it took quite a long time before it percolated out to the industry, and then ultimately it leaked and required this panic at the end that was kind of a media circus. Could we do better? You have companies that lose large amounts of personal data on the internet because they've shipped known buggy code that's open source code. That has a damning effect on the open source communities. So we have to think of this not as who is the idiot that didn't change the default password or who didn't upgrade their system, but how do we work together as an industry to ensure that simple things like that are hard to do. I think that's it's not just a one person is at fault kind of situation. It's an industry systemic thing that we should pay attention to together as open source people. Keep developers happy is another thing we've learned. Now, we always knew that, and that's why you see beanbags and lava lamps being the sort of token example of what makes a cool work environment. But keeping developers happy in this case is productive. And productive means you're not waiting for something. And part of waiting for something is that I wanted to provision a VM, and it took however long because I entered a trouble ticket, and it's 10, 20 days before I get something back. But part of it is not having to build things yourself. So the more you can interact with the rest of the world through services and APIs, the less you have to worry about outside of the scope that you care about. And so this is something that we've seen we're building in collaboration with other folks across the industry, a service broker interface that's usable in Kubernetes and Pivotal and other orchestration platforms to give you access to external services that aren't native to the box or native to the platform that you're building, which I think is an important part of building out these complex systems. These are complex distributed systems with lots of moving pieces where you don't want to be an expert in all of those pieces or own all of those pieces. Another thing that we've learned is, this is really talking to customers. I've never once talked to a customer who builds infrastructure just to burn electricity. It's always there in support of applications. And I'm an infrastructure geek, so it took me some time to admit that, because I really just cared about what's under the hood. But it turns out what's under the hood is only there to support the applications. And so thinking in terms of the application, I think, is really important, at least for users who are trying to deploy this stuff and run their business with it. So it sort of seems kind of crass to put it this way, but this is what businesses care about. And there's probably a couple of caveats. So large-scale service providers build infrastructure, arguably for the sake of the infrastructure, but ultimately that's to sell it to other people to run applications on top. And then there are people who just like to burn electricity, and they're called Bitcoin miners. The other thing that we've learned is, not only do customers and businesses care about the applications, but the data that they're generating is really valuable. So this is where the kind of big data and analytics and machine learning world intersects with applications, something that we've started calling intelligent applications, or applications that are making use of insights that you derive from data that you have through some analytical process. And this is much newer for the industry. It's newer for us, and it changes how you think about what's important. So instead of logic flows, it's data flows. And the amount of data that you capture and store, the question used to be should I turn on debugging briefly for fixing this problem? Now the question should be, why would you ever turn off tracing and monitoring and all this telemetry that's giving you nonstop information out of your infrastructure or your applications? That becomes data that you can then use to learn about your own infrastructure, your own application, and improve it continuously. This data generation and processing, which looks like a data pipeline instead of sort of a logic flow, also is changing how we architect systems end to end. So today, you've got devices, smart devices, you've got laptops connecting to centralized mainframe infrastructure in the cloud. Tomorrow, you've got devices that are emitting not just small amounts of sensor data. We know that there's a bottleneck and bandwidth challenge of downloading 4K video off the internet, but devices are getting more and more intelligent and emitting more and more data. Some of those devices are video cameras. And pushing all of that data back to the cloud is going to be, it doesn't always make sense when you could do some initial processing at the edge of the network, make some initial decisions about what needs to get pushed all the way to the cloud and what is just short-term data that's helping you improve maybe the model that your car's using as you drive along or something like that. So the difference between where we place compute is going to shift over time. Today, if you think of it in a software model, we're kind of in the client-server era, and we're going to a multi-tier model with edge computing and cloud. And I think that's interesting in a number of ways. One, just architecturally interesting. Two, the data sources are rich. And again, many of them are video. Video is being analyzed. Video has pictures of you and I in it, and there's machines that can recognize us, and so there's some privacy concerns, maybe. And there's different kinds of applications that we can create when we have this new relationship between the data source, the compute location, which is close to the data source, and I don't think we know what those applications look like. The primary applications that people talk about are autonomous vehicles, augmented reality, virtual reality. So those are fun to think about, but I'm sure there's a whole new suite of applications that we haven't even thought of yet that will result from this shift in architectural design. So some other considerations. As we bring AI into the world, more and more we have to think about the social impact. It's not just automating away jobs, which has one level of social impact, but it's encoding our biases into our models. It's the kind of maybe privacy concerns or all the data that's being captured about all of us that somebody knows that maybe you didn't want them to know. I mean, there's a whole set of questions that come along with machine learning that aren't just technical questions. Blockchain, we didn't talk much about it, but some people think of blockchain as a mechanism for building decentralized distributed applications. So, and there's autonomy happening at every sort of chain in the block. I don't know if I got that right. But there's another way to look at it, which is you're decentralizing control. And decentralizing control is kind of the ultimate in democratizing value and trade and assets. And that has potential to have a massive impact on not just the economy and not just Bitcoin miners, but how we think about how we work with trust and delegate trust and build these kind of trust models that historically were closer to human trust relationships. You trust a brand, you trust the bank, you trust these names because you've heard about them and they've been around for a long time. Trusting things at a more cryptographic level and decentralizing authority has kind of a profound impact, potential profound impact on society. Just food for thought. I mentioned security and open source. This is one that kind of bothers me. It keeps me up at night because I feel like we have a lot of potential to do great things, and it doesn't take more than a few simple mistakes happening consistently over time to really tarnish the reputation of open source. So this is something where we could work together and make a difference. And then the other piece, which is closer to what I started with, community, initiative, everybody in here, you can make an impact. So thank you for listening. Have a great DevConf, and look forward to talking to you over beers.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks, everyone. So right now we have approximately 20 minutes before our first talk of the day will start. Make sure you find the rooms. We have different rooms than last year, so some of the rooms are actually across the main road. So check out the maps here, check out where the workshops are, get a coffee and get ready. Thank you.